Hemshech Chaim Beis, Volume 1, we're up to the bottom of page 331, discourse number, I believe 42, sorry, discourse 42, Dvarim. Yes. So we did 6 classes on just the last chapter, 164, which would mean an accumulation of around 9 hours of discussion on one chapter. So there's plenty online if anybody wants to go over that. I'm not going to review that again for now. But overall, in the overall context of things, as the drama of Ayin Beis unfolds, where we are is in the thick of understanding the interface that is the Torah. So as we've discussed so many times, Ayin Beis is all about the interface, as is Chassidus and Kabbalah in general. Interface meaning the intermediary interface connection between us and God, us and the divine, and on terms that we can relate to. That's of course the key, because else it's not a relationship. And ultimately when Mashiach comes, we're basically speaking about his total fusion, where the Tachtenim, where the existence as we know it, that is independent, that is self-absorbed, and that is all that we know about material life, will be reunited with its source, without annihilating one or the other. In other words, the source won't annihilate existence, and existence won't, shall we say, obfuscate the divine. There'll be a seamless flow, which is really the purpose of all science. Even is the search for unity, where there's one rule, unified field theory that connects it all. Psychologically, the same is true. Psychologically, a human being abhors fragmentation and abhors being splintered into parts. So having a unified element that does not overwhelm or override our diversity is the key. Basically, harmony within diversity. Total Achdus means not that everything is one clone. It means that you have a multifarious and a multiplicity, a multiple universe, but it's all united like the human body or like nature. Millions and billions of different organisms, trillions of organisms, all working together in one coordinated whole. I was just reading, we have 75 trillion cells in the human body, 100 plus trillion microbes, just in one body, just to give you a sense. And of course in a healthy body, they all work together. And even things that are seemingly negative or on their own may seem to be a negative, put together in the right coordination, they all become positives. So you could see Mashiach basically as being the healthiest universe. Think of it, the best and healthiest universe. A universe working exactly in line with its purpose. But to get there, obviously, is far more painful and difficult, and that's the challenge. So Chassidus and Ayin Beis in particular gives us the interfaces, the switches, how you make each connection in each particular area, and there's so many different areas, so obviously it's a comprehensive picture. But overall, we're dealing here with is that the divine and existence are different in so many different ways, and all those elements have to be accounted for. Everything needs to have. It's almost like like a checklist. That when something is distant in a certain way, you need to have something that counters it and creates that interface. So overall, the whole Ayin Beis so far has been about primarily 2 forms of energy: Eir HaBligvul and Eir HaGvul, which in simple English means transcendent energy and immanent energy. As I say always in almost in every class, that to really appreciate and understand, especially the more esoteric ideas, it's critical that you find an example for it in your own personal life. Or else it becomes a theoretical thing and mathematical and like theoretical physics. It doesn't have that resonating element. So we all have within us a transcendent and a immanent, a bligvul and a gvul. It's not called bligvul amiti. It may not be the ultimate transcendent, but it's definitely a transcendent force. And then there's the immanent force. The classic example used in Ayin Beis from the Alter Rebbe is Keiches HaNefesh, like he says in Tanya, Nishtalshlu Mehem, Bipsari, from my flesh I behold God. Our faculties evolved from the spheres, so they're a perfect example. They are a model to help us understand Keiches Pnimim. How do our faculties work? Er Nakeli, Kei Chariya, the power to see in the Klei Ha'ayin, in the eye, the power to hear in the ear, and so on through the entire body. Then we have a transcendent force, and that's the Ratzon within us, our desires, our will. That is not defined by any particular location, and as he discussed at length, it has a far more transcendent element to it. It's an equalizer, it's not bound by the specifics, and both are necessary to function. Imagine a person has all the faculties functioning, but they have no will, no desire to wake up, no desire to function. Or someone has desire but has no faculties, God forbid, or they're compromised. So this is an example, and we learned example here doesn't just mean an example for us to understand. It's actually an evolution, an evolved state of Keiches Eres Pnimim and Eres Makifim. Eres Pnimi is the 10 spheres. Chochma, there's Eres Chochma and Klei HaChochma. There's Eres Habina and Klei Habina. There's Eres HaChesed, the energy of Chesed and the container of Chesed. And then there's Keser. Keser is the Makif. Keser is an equalizer. What's the purpose of each of these? So one, as we learned in the beginning of this part of the Hemshech, is to shape existence, to create existence. One regulates the flow, that there should be an existence, a structure. Like the regulating of the flow of how much energy goes from your nefesh into your eye and into your ear, into your other faculties. The front door, please. The second one brings bittul into existence, introduces bittul. It's not just a shaper, it's a sublimator, you can say. It's a sublimator, and it helps transform existence. To understand these two, began a long discussion of the difference between Matan Torah and the Avos. Essentially, this plays itself out also in history. So here we have it in the structure. We have it also in the structure of existence. We have it in the structure of the higher worlds, the spheres and so on, Keser. And we have it also in history. First come the Avos, who realigned the universe that was detached and wandered away from its source. They realign it, so basically they're reconnecting existence to its Eiragvul. As he explained, that needs it to go to a place that's all the way back to the source. So it's more than just the regulating flow that creates and shapes. It also has the power to reveal, but not to transform. So you have creating, shaping, you have revealing, and you have transforming. And transformation happens through Matan Torah. The power to transform, rather. Because the Matan Torah reveals the Ir HaBligvul, which is beyond existence, and that, in turn, empowers existence to get outside of its own way, so to speak, to get beyond its own blind spots and subjectivity, to be able to experience something that is beyond. Then begins why Matan Torah? What happened to Matan Torah? It wasn't just a hamshach, it wasn't just a transmission of Ir HaBligvul, it came through Torah. Because Torah is the vehicle through which we achieve this. Torah is equated with Chochmah, wisdom. Because Torah is study. Even though Torah has in it mitzvahs and so on, but we're talking now about the Chochmah of Torah, the Stakel Barais, that God looks into the Torah and creates the world. And that's the operative theme that we're now in the middle of. It's a long theme that will not go back, we won't go back to till chapter 170. It began right here in chapter chapter 162, which continued, in other words, after finishing the chapters about the Avos and concluding how we, so-called, as I've been describing it, refine and maximize the pipes, meaning the Kav HaMidah, and we reach even higher than the Kav HaMidah, which is that measures the flow. What the Avos did, they set the stage. Then comes the stage of Matan Torah. So Matan Torah is God looks into the Torah and creates the world. What better interfaces than that? It's Kudsha Brichu, it's Stakel Baraisa, and can you again close the door there? Someone please go close the front door. Kutchebrichu is Takel Baraisa, and Ubara Alma. So you have Kutchebrichu, and you have the world, but how? Through looking into the Torah, through looking into His Chochmah. So it's God is beyond Chochmah. Beyond is God, beyond wisdom, is beyond the structure for that matter, beyond all spheres. But He looks into the Chochmah, which He created, in order to create a blueprint, Torah, and with that He creates. So first He explained how Chochmah is Chochmah of Atzilus. Chochmah of Atzilus connects to Chochmah of the 10 hidden spheres, which is the way God envisions the existence, and that in turn creates Chochmah that we have down here on earth. So when we're able to comprehend and be able to feel the divine, that's through the Emtsois, as He put it, the interface of Atzilus. Now, you have to get out of your head that Atzilus or any of these levels are worlds. It's actually one of the worst things was to teach us as kids that they're worlds. Because worlds right away you equate with planets. And you equate with your vision of what a world is. These are not worlds, these are states of consciousness. These are states of energy, completely. So yes, we called it Elamus, but what does Elam mean in Ruchnius? It's just a word you could always keep repeating, because as long as you keep going back to the thing that it's a world, right away you're going to have all kinds of problems. What do you mean it's a world? What kind of world is it? A world also it suggests that they're all like equal worlds. It's states of consciousness, essentially. It's one reality going through different states of consciousness. That's the best way to really describe. And when it goes from Atzilus to Bria, that's a paradigm shift. In Atzilus itself, it's the same state of consciousness, relatively speaking. So it's states of consciousness. And if you think of that way, then climbing the ladder really is climbing to higher states of consciousness. Or for that matter, unconsciousness, depending where you are. For some people's unconscious, for some people the unconscious is other people's conscious, and so on. So when you talk about before the Tzimtzum, you're really talking not before the Tzimtzum, like again people envision it as being, okay, it's like going through the sky all the way before the sky or something. Before the Tzimtzum is a state where there's no consciousness altogether. The only reason we can talk about it is because the God revealed that itself in the Torah. As we discussed in the last chapter, Tzimtzum reveals to us that infinite distance and allows us to talk about things that are infinitely distant, and things are revealed to us from that place. It makes sense because that's what means being revealed. It makes sense because it comes into remember, it's all rooted in the Torah, where God's wisdom, He placed in a body of wisdom the entire picture. So you have that. Then he moves on and says that the Torah is not just Chochmah of Atzilus, it's actually Chochmah of Ak, Adam Kadmon. And here now begins a long discussion on Adam Kadmon. What is Adam Kadmon? Of course, the immediate question is, what's the interface of Adam Kadmon different than the interface of Atzilus, and different than the other interfaces we've been talking about? So to explain that's where we're basically at the beginning of, was last chapter. That the interface of Adam Kadmon is not to bridge the infinite gap and schism between before the pre-Tzimtzum consciousness and post-Tzimtzum consciousness. That the Tzimtzum does. The Tzimtzum basically, by concealing and completely siluk, complete so-called removal, really means complete concealment of the energy of that consciousness, allows for an independent consciousness to emerge, and that's that. However, that would be only distance. That would only teach us about the infinite distance of the divine from us. That would be basically a way that would elicit Yiras Hashem. I stand in awe of something that is completely different than I am. But a relationship is not just consist of Yira, it also has to consist of Ava, of closeness. So how does closeness manifest? So the Kav comes after the Tzimtzum. If there was no Kav after the Tzimtzum, someone would say, what happens if there was no Kav? The answer would be, we'd not be able to have a close relationship with the divine. We wouldn't be able to emulate Him. We wouldn't be able to understand Him on our terms. It would be completely like a matter of we're just standing in awe of something that's completely beyond us. The Kav, on the other hand, is and is Gili. So yes, it's a diminished Kav. It's a narrow flow, Kav Amida, it measures, but it becomes a pipeline that conveys. Tzimtzum is the concealment of this teacher that completely conceals everything, so there can be a relationship, in the first place, between two infinitely distant things, realities, entities. The Kav begins to flow, and Ak is the first step after the Kav. It's the first step, it's the blueprint, it's the map. As we'll soon learn, it's Torah. Torah originates in Chochmah of Ak.
Where's the Shemu here?
It's not here, that's why I didn't mention it. I'm not covering the whole map. That I can tell you right now. Rishimu is the source of Kalim. So Rishimu is a Helam, not a Gili. So, I'm talking about Gili. Rishimu is what remains from the envisioning of God, envisioning the structure before the Tzimtzum. What remains are Asius, but they're empty Asius until the Kav enters. They will shape existence. Rishimu is the shaper, the shape, the actual substance, the defining shape. The Kav is the energy that defines it. The Rishimu is like the film. The Kav is the light from the projector that shines through the film.
There's no Torah pre-Tzimtzum?
Everything is pre-Tzimtzum. But pre-Tzimtzum, there's no reality. There's only God. You can't talk anything.
You said it's Ak, so
It is Ak. Exactly.
Before.
But everything is before. So the Kav comes from before. But before Tzimtzum, there is nothing to talk about. Before Tzimtzum is a divine consciousness that doesn't have any relationship with anything. There's no room. It's complete. It's completely, infinitely distant from anything we can relate to. If we had the Torah from before the Tzimtzum, it would mean nothing to us. We wouldn't understand it. Just like if we had any energy from before the Tzimtzum, we couldn't tolerate. Atik is after the Tzimtzum.
Okay.
Atik, generally speaking, Atik is at the beginning of either before Atzilus, or it's the beginning of Ak. There's a bridge. There's interfaces there too.
The others did not have it.
Did not have what?
What we have after Matan Torah, that too.
You tell me. Were they able to do mitzvahs and gashmis? It's not a chidush shemayim beis. This is even up in England. They kimu kol ha'teira kula, but not in beruchnis. So they had that. That's the lashon in Gemara. They were not commanded, and they didn't have certain. Look, it's a pasuk in Chumash. Shmi havaya lei nedaiti lehem. So lei means they didn't have something. This is, you don't need Dayan Beis for that. Dayan Beis is explaining what they didn't have. But I wouldn't put it in those words. It's not that they didn't have it. They didn't need it. That was not their Aveda. If God wanted to give the Torah to Adam and Chava, He would have. He didn't. There's a reason why not. Because their role was to set the stage. It's like you can't give a child a Torah. They're not mechuyev mitzvahs until you're bar mitzvah. Because before bar mitzvah, you're not yet a mature enough intelligence to receive it. So God gave Chesed Chinam before Matan Torah. That's the Chavav Deidish and Zun B'Chazir Shal Kadosh Baruch Hu. Gemara Pesach. But that was from above. The Torah's purpose is transformation. To be given before Matan Torah would not have transformed. They had to do it on their effort. It's like you do your part, then comes from above. As I've said many times, you can't have a relationship with pre-Tzimtzum, period. The only way you can have it is because you have after Tzimtzum, you can climb, and through that you can begin to. There's no way to talk about pre-Tzimtzum, because if there was a way to talk about it, then why do you need a Tzimtzum? The whole point of the Tzimtzum is that the energy before the Tzimtzum would remain. There'd be ein makom le'elamus. You know what means ein makom? There'd be no place for us to exist. So the mere fact that statement, that clearly tells you can't talk about it. We talk about it because we talk about it through extrapolation. Once is a Tzimtzum, we speculate. Or we're told that before the Tzimtzum, and God, these things are rooted there. So you have the levels, but you have to immediately qualify anything you say pre-Tzimtzum, that it's only a discussion of, like, we see this reality, and we're told that on the other side, there is in the divine consciousness that is beyond us all, there are the beginning of the seeds. But you can't even call them seeds. If you remember, there's a whole chapter on 10 hidden spheres. Why you can't even call them 10 or hidden or spheres? They're just a name that we use to describe the source of, because God wanted existence to make sense. So just like in our nefesh, when you envision something right now, let's say you're envisioning going somewhere today, or you're envisioning writing something or painting something, right? The envisioning is already a state of consciousness. How's that envisioning before you began to envision it? You can't even talk about it. Right? It was in your nefesh somewhere. In your soul, you have the capacity to draw, to write, to achieve something. At that point, no, you don't even know it's there. You don't even know it's there, let alone others. Because the nefesh, it's in a completely amorphous state. You'd almost say it's a potential state. But you have to say it's in a state, it's something is there because it came from there. If you didn't have a nefesh altogether, you would never be able to do anything. So there's a root of everything, but mistake. That's an example, and this example is also not sufficient because even nefesh you can't say is pre-tzimtzum. Even that's already an entity. So imagine saying that we all have a nefesh, and then there's the nefesh originate from. That's all still post-tzimtzum. Take all that, and some way in the divine consciousness there is some type of something. All we can really is call it as Ein Sof Malakol HaMetzias. It's a divine consciousness that is not built in Metzias Nimtza. That's the only thing we can say, that it does exist, but it does not, and it exists not in a non-existential state of existence, which is Atzmos itself. But then going back now, so Torah becomes the blueprint. This is where God will look into the Torah. We're calling that Chachma of Ak. So then what is Ak's role in the interface? So he explains Ak's role is not the distance, not to bridge the distance. That's accounted for through the Tzimtzum. Ak's role is also not to connect Chesed from the lowest levels all the way to the 10 hidden spheres that is pre-Tzimtzum, because that's covered by the Eir HaGvul. That since God, just like He has an infinite way of transmitting, He has also a parallel track called a finite way of transmitting, meaning like the artist that has infinite possibilities and chooses to manifest in one. So that accounts for so-called where Chesed originates from. So there's a Chesed in the divine pre-Tzimtzum energy somewhere. But it's not, as I said, in any literal sense of the word, and you can't identify it. All you can do is just say, this connects somewhere there. The Tzimtzum creates the bridge, or you can say the split, but also the bridge, because it accounts for that infinite distance. And then comes the Kav. Now, as he says, that creation comes with derech kiruv. It all has to come with a gili, because the painter, the artist, doesn't just will a piece of art. He actually takes a brush to a canvas. That's a metaphor. A brush to a canvas is a metaphor of the Kav applying itself and actually shaping each level. And Ak is the first general energy. It's called Er Klali at times. Tzemach Tzedek says that's the expression Alter Rebbe used that he heard from the name of the Maggid, Er Klali, which means an all-encompassing type of energy. Think of it like a blueprint. Everything in existence originates in Ak. That's why you say Machshava Gduma Ak in Hayom Yom and other places. It says everything's Hashgacha Pratis. Even when a leaf turns in the wind, it all originates in Machshava Gduma da Ak. Why Ak? Because Ak is the place, primordial man. That's what Adam Kadmon means. It is essentially, it doesn't mean man, it means structure. It means the primordial structure. The primordial structure where it's like the blueprint. Everything is there. Everything in existence is in the blueprint, like an architectural blueprint.
Is this the Kav?
No. The Kav is a flow of energy that will travel through Ak and downward. It's like, Ak is the brush. The Kav is the brush. And Ak is a first state of consciousness that comes out of this brush. So Kav is a form of energy. A Kav is a flow. Ak is what the story it tells. Or we're telling not just the story, the number, the story, the illumination that it emanates. So Ak has 10 spheres.
Without Kav, there is no Ak.
Without Eir, there's no Kav. Yeah, of course. Yeah. Way the Lashon in Eitz Chaim is very simple. After the Tzimtzum, a Kav emerged from the infinite, that divine consciousness, a very narrow flow, and made an eagle, a first big circle, and that was Ak. Then it made another one, that's the 10 spheres of Ak. And then everything else will be inside that. So think of it as the big circle that encompasses everything within. Now again, you can't think physically, even though we inevitably do. You have to think of it as the first state of consciousness. Now that state of consciousness, frankly, is beyond our state of consciousness altogether. We cannot relate to it, but you can imagine it, basically.
You're saying it's equated with Igul HaGadol?
No, Igul HaGadol is the sphere like another side, pre-Tzimtzum. This is like the first sphere within. The Igul HaGadol would be, again, something we can't really talk about. This you can call it a blueprint. Like in other words, someone says to you, what do you mean God looked into the Torah and created the world? What does it say in the Torah how to create the world? We can't really answer that. All you could say is it says in the Torah, He What did God really look into? So you have to say He looked into basically His own image. In other words, the artist within his spirit had the image. That's the 10 hidden spheres. Then he some way made that image come into some conscious state. He's looking at that conscious state as he creates, in other words. So he's relating to it. Does he need to? No, God doesn't need any of this. He can do the whole thing without any steps. But that makes it a practical stepping stones that we can retrace these steps and get back there. So there's a process of creation and there's a process of return, because you have the steps. It says that the end of the second half of the Zohar is that Barnash, human being, is Asisasik Baraisa, learns Torah Umekayim Alma, and preserves the world and sustains and elevates the world, you can say. So we have something to talk about. When we learn Torah, we can say we're talking God's language, basically. I mean, Einstein said that science is probing God's mind, which is true, because it's also the way even the science of the world, even though it's Chochmas Ha'elam, but it's not, the world didn't create this wisdom. The wisdom is God's wisdom. It's just we call it Chochmas Ha'elam because it's God's wisdom as it manifests in Elokim, in nature. And the Torah is God's wisdom as it manifests beyond nature. But they both are part of that expression of the divine. So, okay, so basically, so that's Ak. So Ak is that first step, as he says. Ak, the words he used in the last chapter was, Ak is not, Ak is not coming from the perspective of the Ein Arech, the distant, infinite distance. Ak is already is now the first quote step of the interface that relates to us. Shaykhus le'elmas, b'chinas gili. And how does it work? Klal to prat. You begin with a klal, then you go to a prat. That makes total sense. You begin with the seed, and that seed then develops into a tree, into details. So the klal is Ak, and the prat will be the rest of existence. That's where we're up to in this last chapter. That's what it means. Bereshis Lamed Maimerhu, the mission of Pirkei Avos. Basar Mamoros Nivreil. God created the world with 10 utterances, with 10 Mamoros, with 10 statements. Yehir Rakia. What's the 10th? We only count 9. So it says Bereshis Lamed Maimerhu. The Mishnah continues that even though he could have created it with one Maimer, because Bereshis, he could have just said Bereshis. So we see God could have created Bereshis without Yehir. But he wanted the details. The Mishnah says for the schar and the einish. But the real meaning is because he wanted the details. He wanted the breakdown. If it would remain in Bereshis, it would be like a seed, like a nucleus, like Rashi says. Everything is there, and then he extracted it from that. That's Ak. That Bereshis, Nami Maim, Bereshis. Like Baruch Sha'amar v'hoya olam. One word, Baruch Sha'amar. It doesn't say Baruch Sha'emrim, it doesn't say Baruch Sha'amar. Blessed is the one that said, Baruch Shem. So now let's continue the next mimer as customary. The Rebbe Rashab wrote in one flow, but later in the second stage of Ayin Beis, he then said the Maimarim in their corresponding chapters, corresponding parshas, and added in writing the beginnings and ends. So then we're going to start off with Eila Dvarim, but in truth is, the Hemshech really continues in the chapter 165, which we'll learn in a moment. So he begins, so it makes it a little more manageable. I think this is also a good klal of prat. The Hemshech was written one big klal, and then he broke it into Maimarim, makes it a little more wieldy, you can say.
But the neshamas are higher than Torah.
Sometimes it says neshamas are higher than Torah, sometimes it says Torah is higher than neshamas. Is it like exact language of Chassidus? Sometimes the kala is the shamas, sometimes the kala is Torah. There's no one way. It says both. Depends on what you're talking about. If you're talking about, look, the Tanakh of Elio says, Elio asked, he said, Eini Yedaya. It says, Bereishis is B'shul. Eini Yedaya mi kaddim l'mi. You know that both of them preceded everything. Shamas and Torah. And he says, Eini Yedaya mi kaddim l'mi. Until it says, Tzav is b'nei Yisrael, Daben el b'nei Yisrael. So the question is, what do you mean Eini Yedaya? He does know. So you know there's a level where they both are equal. And then there's a level where Torah is higher. There's no black and white in these type of things. It all comes down to what role each one plays.
Can I ask, by Har Sinai, when we heard on Anochi Hashem Elokecha, it says, and Neshomas left. To what level did they return to?
Do I seem like an expert on these type of elevations?
Yes.
All I can say is all I can repeat is what I've learned. No, you ask me like I don't know if there's a one level that it states. You could explain it different ways. I mean, I don't recall in the Maimorim of Chassidus discussing exactly what level. It's possible each person elevated to a level that was commensurate to his Sheirish HaNeshama. That's possible. Or you could say they all elevated to one particular level. I'm not sure. Parcha Nishmasim is the expression. So, Kol Dibur B'Dibur Parcha Nishmasim, then Tal Tchiyah that brought them back.
Kol Dibur V'Dibur?
It says that's the Lashon of the Gemara. Al Kol Dibur V'Dibur Parcha Nishmasim. 10 Dibur, there was 10 Kol Dibur V'Dibur Parcha Nishmasim.
There's only the first two.
First two, whether they heard straight from the Eibishter or not, but it says Al Kol Dibur V'Dibur Parcha Nishmasim. Okay, there's different opinions in that, but I don't recall anywhere reading that is exactly what level it went. Okay, so we go Ela Advarim Asher Dibur Moshe Al Kol Yisrael, the bottom of page 331. I never thought we'd finish chapter 164. That's the way it was going. But I would recommend if you understand a lot of Ayin Beis, that last chapter is a critical junction. It's all recorded, so you could all see it. So Ela Advarim, these are the words that Moshe spoke to Israel, to all of Israel. This is the beginning of Pasha Dvarim, Tofresh Ayin Gimel Terag. V'sorach lav Mashem Mishana Teira. Mishnah Teira, sorry. We have to understand what Mishnah Teira is the name for Dvarim. Mishnah Teira means the repeat of Teira. Because we know the first four Sfarim, Hashem, the story is Hashem, as God related it and as it happened. Mishnah Teira is Moshe's repeating of it all. Right in the beginning it says, Ela Dvarim, these are the words that Moshe uttered when? Rosh Chodesh Shvat, exactly 37 days before his Talkos. So the whole Sefer Dvarim is 37 days, 36 days. Where Moshe repeats, Bairas HaTeira Azez, he goes over the whole, everything that went. That's why you see the language of Mishnah Teira is, many times Moshe says, I went up on the mountain, I did this, I did that. He's repeating, reviewing, because Maseh, last chapter before Dvarim, concludes as they arrive at the east bank of the River Jordan. So after the 42 journeys, that summed up. So now he's saying, what Mishnah Teira is different from the previous books. The earlier books, the first books, they were said kishlish ne'medaber in the third person. The Bechol Teira name Vaydaber Hashem al Moshe. Like almost like you don't like in the third the silent person Vaydaber and God spoke to Moshe. Who's saying that? It's not I, it's not you. It's the third person. Vayemer Hashem al Moshe. Umiya Mesaper Zeis. And who's the one that's telling this? Im name Shemeshu HaMesaper Avalelema Vaydaber Hashem Elai. Who's saying that? Who is saying the first four books? If you say Moshe is the one saying, you shouldn't have said Moshe. You don't say Moshe wouldn't say God spoke to Moses like he's not. He would say God spoke to me. Like we find in the prophets, and there was the word of God to me. And if God is the teller of the story, then he should have said, I spoke to Moshe. It's neither the two. Rather, it's Shlish Medaber. It's called the third person. It's like speaking in a detached way. Umesaper. Now, Shlish Medaber Umesaper, rather, it's the third person speaking and telling Shadibur Hashem al Moshe kach v'kach. It's like a third person speaking.
Narrating.
Yeah. Narrating and saying that Hashem spoke to Moses so and so. Mishnah Teira, however, but Mishnah Teira nemer k'Moshe medaber b'fnei atzmei. Mishnah Torah is different. There it speaks as Moshe speaks from Mipiatzme, from his own mouth. It's Lashon Gemara, Mipiatzme. U'kamei v'eschanan al havaya, like it says in the second parsha, v'eschanan. I implored, or I pleaded before God, to God. V'espal al Hashem, and I prayed to God. V'esnapel lefnei Hashem, and I fell before God. Or I, not fell, was the word, prostrated myself. U'ksiv v'edaber Hashem elai, and it says that God spoke to me. So it's a completely different tone, different voice. Rakas Cholos Mishnah Torah, only the beginning of Mishnah Torah still is in the third. Until Moshe takes over the narration, the first 3 verses, so the beginning of Dvarim is also similar to the first 4 books, where it begins by saying, because it has to have the transition. So the transition from the silent narrator to Moshe, it goes, Elah, these are the words that Moshe spoke, and doesn't say Mihu HaMesapir, who's the one that narrated.
This way it still stays God's Torah.
So we have to understand, what is this thing called the Shlishim, this silent narrator, this third person. And also we have to understand why the first 4 books were said from the mouth of the third, the narrator. Or Mishnah Torah Mishnah Torah was said from Moshe from his own mouth, himself. And then and also why and why the beginning of Mishnah Torah also it speaks in the third voice, the third person. We also understand what is the inyan of Eila Advarim. What does it mean, these words that he spoke? The actual word Eila Advarim, what does it mean? Now, if you're into interface language, you right away see it. Interfaces all over the place here, right? It's obvious. Hashem speaking, Moshe speaking, is in whose terms, basically? So you have right here both elements. That's without even going into what he's going to answer. Okay. Yeah. Like I told you, of course, that's why we're saying Torah is, even Torah that Hashem speaks, is also speaking in words. We learn Bereshis Bara Lakim, we learn Vaydaber Hashem al Moshe. These are words we can hold on to. They're definitely handles that allow us to speak the language of the divine. At the end of the day, what Torah is. So Lahavin calls that, to understand all this, Yesh Lahagdim, again, this little piece, including this Lahavin calls that, was written later, could have been even months later, if not even a year later. So it's very good, these summaries, because there's the Rebbe Rashab summarizing his own previous Maimer at a later stage. So he didn't write this right after he wrote the previous Maimer. So it's like he wrote it on a second stage. So Lahavin calls that, to understand all this. Based on what?
Saying it?
Because it's a good reality check. Because sometimes he'll say things in a different tone, a little. It's a summary that comes. Even the Kitsurim, by the way, were written years later. Yeah, so the Kitzur is even better, even more. So basically, you have for every chapter you have a Kitzur, a summary, at least to the second half of the second book, and you have these Akdamas. This goes till the end of the second book. The third volume is completely Chelik Shalei Nemar. Is only one flow of Hemshech without beginnings and ends, without chapters, without summaries. But we'll worry. But by then we'll have mastered this, so it'll be easier to understand. We'll all be a little older then, and wiser, hopefully. Well, the Havan calls that, to understand this. We preface what we've learned before. The Ak Mamutza Bein Ein Sof LeElmus. Ak is the interface between Ein Sof, the infinite light, divine energy, and the worlds. I should say worlds, I should say states of consciousness, right? As I just said. But Ilm technically is called world, but worlds really mean states of consciousness, not worlds as in planets. Vihiksha, the Rebbe Rashab also speaks in the third person, by the way. He says, yes, Mashn is boil, Hiksha. And Vihiksha, and I was asked, Haloi Ak, hu b'chinas Adam de Bria, the Klolos. Isn't Ak B'chinas Adam de Bria, of the macrocosm? There's a long discourse from the Alter Rebbe and explained by the Tzemach Tzedek. I mentioned it. In my opinion, it's very important to learn if you really want to understand a lot of principles, Chassidus in general. It's called Gimel, the Drush Gimel Minei Adam.
Where is it?
It's printed in Eira Teira Bolak and also in Eira Teira in Yonim. Give me the sefer, I'll tell you what page. I always refer back to it.
What's it called?
They're called Drush Gimel Minei Adam. The Drush, the discourse on the three types of Adam. It's page 77 in Eira Teira in Yonim. And there he explains the Eitz Chaim, when he talk about the structure of existences, we talk about three worlds, right? Bri, Yitzir, Asiya. Also Atzilus. He discusses all that there. Where these dimensions rest. Where do they live in the cosmic order, essentially? Where do they live on the cosmic website, we can say? And so it explains it that there's two ways to look at the worlds, to look at the cosmic order. One is Bechlolus, macrocosm, and microcosm. Microcosm, you have Bri, Yitzir, Asiya, and Atzilus, that we usually speak about. That's the one that's default, usually speaks about the macrocosm. But macrocosm, when you speak about the whole picture, that does not include Ak. Ak then would be part of Elamus Ein Sof, relative to the microcosm. But in macrocosm, Ak is then Adam Debriya, because it's the first existence after the Kav, after the Tzimtzum. Yitzira would be, macrocosm would be Akudim and Akudim, sometimes Atik and Arich. And Atzilus and Biyah, microcosm, would be Asiya macrocosm.
In that structure,
So it's like a hologram, huh? He asks this question. It's usually not discussed, but it would be basically right before the Tzimtzum. It would be like the 10 hidden spheres. But it's not discussed as in the context. It's called Atzilus the Klolos at times, but it's very rare. You're not going to find a lot of discussion about it. But that's what it is. In this Maimar, I don't think he even refers to it. He asked the question why Atzilus is not counted in this structure. But Atzilus usually means emanation, not recreation. So emanation is generally more of a revelation. She asked the question, isn't that a contradiction? How could you call Atzilus microcosm both Asiya and Atzilus? The answer is because there's relativity going on. That's simple. In other words, it's all about levels and levels that continue to repeat themselves many times over. I told you, it's states of consciousness. So generally speaking, in our context, Atzilus and the Neshama of Atzilus is a state of divine state. But if you want to talk about the real picture compared to before the Tzimtzum, then Atzilus is really Asiya, and Ak would be Bria. So it's not a contradiction. It depends really what you're talking about.
Bia doesn't count even.
Bia would be part of Atzilus, would be a part of Asiya, the Klolos. Bia Pratis would go part of Asiya. Would be Atzilus and Bia would come together. Think of it like circles, like a hologram. You have the big circle in general, and then within that itself, remember, in every world you have an Atzilus, in every dimension you also have the other. Like for example, in Atzilus there's a Bria in Atzilus, there's a Yitzir in Atzilus, and there's Atzilus within Atzilus. So you have this constantly. It's not, once after a while you just simply have to realize that you're talking here literally like the cellular structure of a human being. The DNA are both in the follicle of hair and in your heart. It's the same DNA. It just repeats itself. Depends what dimension. So it's like saying the reflection of the sun in a drop or in an ocean. It's the same sun reflecting in different dimensions. So it really depends on what our context is. It's easier to talk microcosm. Macrocosm, you're talking in very general terms. Microcosm makes it much more relevant. You can talk about it in specific terms. If someone say to you that you have, for example, an Atzilus within you, what does that mean? You want to have Atzilus, tell me what level I have. It's much easier to see Chesed within Chesed than just to speak about Chesed in general. Like for example, stars. In stars, there's a star that's called Keichav. And all stars are called Keichav. It's the same idea. There's a Seder called Taurus, and there's a Masechta called Taurus. It's that type of idea where you have the general ideas there, but then when you have to really work, now Veda you have to have details. You can't just talk in general terms. But if you want the picture, it's in those general terms, and the beauty of it is that it does repeat itself. That's the whole point here. That Bria in the general will become a Bria in the specific. So they have a relationship with each other, and you can relate. Again, it's part of the interface. This hologram image is also very interfacial. Can you say that? Interfacial? Vram. Okay, interfacial. There's interracial and there's interfacial. Huh? I just saw the Rebbe writes about instead of having interfaith dialogues, they should have interfaith dialogues.
It's true. You Rebbe said that?
In the letter, yeah, he writes
That's
it.
great.
Yeah,
What is it?
In what?
He says interfaith. It should have inner.
he wants to know the difference.
Not an example of difference.
To go deeper into your Judaism instead of Judaism and Christianity.
Okay, here, I don't know if the Rebbe said it. Instead of saying Yerushalayim ha'atiko, Yerushalayim ha'asido.
Okay, yeah. Will you go up to the past or the future? Yeah.
That's atiko.
Okay.
Neshama d'Atzilus. What is this?
A tzaddik is a neshama d'Atzilus. That's what I'm calling it. Generally speaking, neshama d'Atzilus.
Micro or the macro?
Micro, usually micro. Like you don't usually say somebody is a neshama of Ak. You won't say that. Well, you won't say that because Ak is really the blueprint. It's like saying a neshama from the blueprint. Everything originates in the blueprint. It's too beyond. Atzilus the pratis, you're already dealing with a defined reality. Ovis come from Atzilus, Chesed of Atzilus. Moshe was Chacham of Atzilus. Atzilus speaking to Pari down on earth. That's what I'm saying. When you speak in practical, you have to speak the microcosm. You speak on the map, the big picture, then you can speak in that's really the difference between the two languages. That's why in default, usually you speak Atzilus, you're talking about Atzilus of microcosm. But the whole picture, to cover it all, you have to say everything. That's really what it comes down to. So Ak is Bria in the sense that it's a blueprint. But if you said, is this Bria as in Bria at the beginning of creation? No, because Ak is still a blueprint. It's like a blueprint. Bria, on the other hand, will be a Chemer Hiyuli. Will be actually substance without shape. Whatever that means in spiritual terms. But you don't say that on Ak. On Ak you speak, relatively you could say the Ak. Compared to before the Tzimtzum, Ak is already the so-called the first seed. But it's not really, it's more of a blueprint. It's more on the level of our consciousness is the beginnings of the first whispers of existence, if you want to put it that way.
In Torah Shalom, the Rebbe Rashab saying that Ash, referring to himself, is in the Shomidah.
Maybe you'll find something, I don't know, can you show me that language? Ak usually refers to Adam Arishan. But Adam Arishan is as in the context of encompassing all of existence. We speak Ak, generally speaking, even a leaf in the wind is rooted in Ak. If you have an exception, I'd like to see it. I'm not saying I can't find one, but it's very rare.
Just about himself, I don't think there's any other.
But I'd like to see that inside. I don't know if it's because, as I said, if you find it's going to be once or twice, but very rare. And because you say Moshe is neshama d'Atzilus, I don't think the Rebbe Rashab is trying to say he's higher than Moshe. But anyway.
Alter Rebbe is saying in a Maimer that Moshe was honored because compared to the Neshamas of Lamech and Chanoich, he was humble because they are from Shemitah Rishayna, and Moshe was also from Shemitah Rishayna, but he was lower than them. I don't know even it is such a big difference.
Well, Shemitah Rishayna usually is Toyu. So it's not generally speaking. Yeah, no, look at Torah in Shmos, I know. Yeah, the Bavus the Maimer. The Shemitah Rishayna says from the Arizal that it's Beruchen, it's not Begashmis. The Shemitahs. From Sefer HaTemunah, right? It's a very famous piece, yeah.
He mentioned Lamech. Who heard about Lamech before?
Yeah. So anyway, this is Ak. So it's the Mamutza. By the way, we have a Torah Shalom here. If you could show it to me, I'd like to see it.
I'll have to look it up again. I don't remember right now where it is.
Okay. And I was explained that so is the Ak Eina Kamoy. So that's the question. No, I skipped the line. Haloi Ak b'chinas b'riya about the b'riya closed. The be'eina reich legabe erin sof. The eich shaykh le'emishu b'chinas mamutza. Ak is the Adam the b'riya. As I just said, b'riya it's the first so primordial creation. So how do you call it an interface between Ein Sof? So in his bar it was explained. The interface of Ak is not like an interface, like a mamutz, an intermediary between a higher and lower level. That has a commonality to the above and a commonality to below. That you can say on Eir HaGvul, you can say that, as he explained. Or you could say that even on the... No, you can't say that on the Tzimtzum, because the Tzimtzum there's no Ishtavus, there's no commonality. Rather, Inyan HaMamutz Adaku be'inyan HaYisavus Levad. The Mamutz Avak is already in the Hisavus itself, in the creation alone, not pre-creation to creation. In the creation itself, the B'chadesham B'chinas Ha'er V'Agil Dein Ensof Yisavus Ha'elamus. That in order for the energy and the revelation of the infinite of energy, there should be creation of the world. First has to be shaping something, the creation, bringing it in general terms. And afterwards it comes into details. So Ak is already, so to speak, on the end. Once you've already done the Tzimtzum, which dealt with that there's nothing in common with us and the divine, then in the process of creation itself, the Ak serves as the bridge between the beginnings and the lower stages. V'zeu Keda Haderis Mereish. See, this does not say in the last Maimer. And this is the meaning, Keda Haderis Mereish. We say Rosh Hashanah. That he called to the generations from the beginning. You say, what Mereish means from the head. He called Keda Haderis. Like, in other words, God foresaw all the generations to come. Haina Mereish Da'ak. What means Reish? The head. Reish Da'ak. Rosh Hashanah, by the way, is connected, Adam Arishan, connected to Ak. Haina Mereish Da'ak, from the head of Ak. Da'ak Nishava Elam B'chinas Klal V'ach Kach Nifnetu B'derech Prat. Because from Ak, the worlds were created in a general way, like a general, like precious. Everything is there, but it's in a nucleus, and afterwards it was broken down into details. And now we start chapter 165. And to understand this, the additional explanation, can you do it? To understand this, in other words, what is exactly Ak's role here? We understand the idea of Klal and Prat, that we know. Kedu Deris Mereish. The idea that there is some initial stage where everything is encompassed and envisions everything that will come. But to understand it in detail, we know that in Yedua it's known that general Ishtalshus, interesting expression, the general cosmic order. Ishtalshus literally means, as we know, evolution actually. Ishtalshus like a chain. A Ishtalshus of a chain of events, like. In this case, a chain of consciousness as it evolves. The Klolosin has Aseidav Hadroga Be'elmas, and the general order and hierarchy, you can say, or structure of the worlds, of these conscious states, Humetzada Er Pnimi, comes from the Er Pnimi, as we've learned at length before. The Mitzada Er Makif, because from the perspective because from the Er Makif, from the side of Tzad,
in regards,
from the perspective from the Er Makif, Eina Shayach Klal Klolos in Ishtalshlos V'Seidav Hadrog. Makif, that's what it means. Like he says in Tanya in Perik Memches. Makif doesn't mean surrounds outside. It means that it's beyond structure. So that's why we call it surround. It doesn't mean surround as in it's not inside. It's here too. It's within, but it's not defined by within. So it's there, but it's not in any structural way. From Meir Makiv's perspective, it's not shaykh, it's not possible, the general cosmic order and the order and hierarchy. It's specifically mitzad from the Er Pnimi. The Er Pnimi is what defines, and we learned this at length, if you remember, about those chapters about Ma'ilo Mata. What does higher and lower mean? So he spoke higher and lower. Ma'ilo Mata and Ruchni doesn't mean physically higher and lower. It's not first floor, second floor. So he spoke higher and lower. If you recall, he spoke about it as Ribu Yamiyat, more and less. Kamus, in other words, more energy, less energy, which really means closer to the source or more distant from the source. That's what defines higher and lower. And that's Er Pnimi. And then he said that there's actually a fundamental difference between Chachma and Bina. So Er Pnimi is what defines structure. It defines it, number one, by defining entities that are completely different. Chachma is different than Bina. Makiv cannot make that statement. And Makiv, Chachma, and Bina are equal. The will to use your mind, your will to feel with your heart, from the will's perspective, they're both the same. From the perspective of what difference in Chesed and Gvura, or Moich and Midas, that's from Er Pnimi. And also the level, the measure of flow. Makif has equal flow everywhere. In Primi, you can say there's more energy in a higher level, less energy. In the next level is closer to the source, more distance from the source. That was discussed at length.
But they are
Back in
makif,
chapters
they are makif also.
in the 30s. Back in the 30s.
Meir Makif, you also have levels.
So there's a whole Hemshech Chaim Beis talks about that at length. He has that question, he discusses it. But but it doesn't create the structure of existence, even though there may be levels. There's whole chapters just on that question. I would say like 30, 40 chapters just on this. It ultimately comes down that Ir HaBligvul, the infinite possibilities of the artist can envision one possibility. But that's still not a piece of art. That a Bligvul envisions the Gvul. That's really what it comes down to. And there are 3 levels in that he spoke about. Remember, misper, number, story, and brightness or transparency.
That was in terms of Kalim.
Like it says in Eitz Chaim and Mavish Sha'arim, let me just say this. The Arizal, as you know, didn't write any of his Torah. Reb Chaim Vital wrote most of it. There was also another Talmud called Yisrael Sarug that left Sfas and went to Europe and Italy. There was another two different so-called scribes, and the Reb Chaim Vital writes in the introduction to Eitz Chaim, they are not allowed to learn anyone else except he's the only one that was given permission to write the Arizal's Torah. So Yisrael Sarug was seen as somewhat of a what do we call it? No, he was a holy man, but he was seen by some. He was not seen as an authority, because the Kabbalah of the Yisrael Sarug has things that the Rav Chaim Vital doesn't speak about. For example, the Rishima. The Rishima is from the Kabbalah of Yisrael Sarug. Shashua Melech Batzmusei. It's a whole bunch of sugis that are come from Yisrael Sarug. Yisrael Sarug's Talmidim ended up being like the Emek HaMelech and Shever Yosef, different. But the Rebbe brings in Mishnah Chassidim. The Rebbe brings. So the Rebbe brings that the Tzemach Tzedek writes that even though the Rachav said what he said, but the Alter Rebbe quotes Mishnah Chassidim in many places, as well as Emek HaMelech and so on. So the Rabbeim basically use both, and therefore they're both holy. But I'm just saying for the record, the Rebbe once spoke about it. Rab Chaim Vital made it very clear that he's the authority of it all.
Based on what? The Arizal said so? What did he say?
He was a holy man. I trust him. Yeah.
He said that the Arizal said only him.
Yeah.
Only him.
Yeah. He actually forbids anyone reading anything else. To go even more bluntly, they don't contradict. That's what Chassidus brings them. They don't contradict. There's different language. There's a little different language. The language of Emek HaMelech is very different. There are ideas that are spoken very differently in, even about the Tzimtzum. There's different discussions. It's a whole different sugis. Like if you hear about the Tzimtzum, the square Tzimtzum, the circle. I've written about this at length. The square Meruba, Tzimtzum B'derech Meruba, which seems to contradict Eitz Chaim, because Eitz Chaim said that Tzimtzum has to be a circle because it's the only way that's an equalizer. If it's a square, some parts are closer to the divine than others. But the Rebbe speaks about the Meruba. There's different the levels. Bottom line, they are reconcilable for sure, and many things are very similar, but a lot of things are different. There's the new things in Yisrael Sarug's Kabbalah.
What's his famous sefer? The name of his sefer?
Shever Yosef is not his sefer. His Talmidim.
Who's
Emek HaMelech, Shever Yosef.
Shin
Beis Resh.
Who's the Mavishar?
So that's what I'm saying. Mavisharim is the Rab Chaim Vital. So Rab Chaim Vital wrote many books. Many of them have his name in it. Eitz Chaim, Pri Eitz Chaim, Eitzos Chaim.
Oh, Chaim Vital.
And Mavisharim is another one. So the Eitz Chaim is the most comprehensive one, used most by the Alter Rebbe because it was benimtza. It was by him. But the most reliable, the Rebbe Rashab writes, are the Shmeina Sha'arim. They're called the 8 gates. The Rebbe Rashab writes, and we know today that it's most reliable. Remember, there's manuscripts, there's many mistakes, and so on. So the Shmeina Sha'arim are Svarim like Shar HaMitzvahs, Shar Ruach HaKodesh, Shar HaPsukim, Shar HaGulgulim. There are 8 gates. Everything's Reb Chaim Vital. 8 gates, and Shar Kavanas. So those are the most reliable, but interestingly, were not by the Alter Rebbe. Didn't have most of them. He had some of them, but not all of them.
So what's the Mavishar? That's all the
So Mavi Shalom is a sefer like the Eitz Chaim begins with the Tzimtzum at the beginning of the book. Mavi Shalom and Eitz Chaim are very similar to the beginning of Eitz Chaim, with some differences. They talk about the process of creation. Eitz Chaim then continues on and talks about the whole Seder Shtashus, Ak and Toyu and Atzilus and the whole thing. Ibur, Yunikamech, the works. Eitz Chaim is a big book. Mavi Shalom and Eitz Chaim are thin, are very small, and they're mostly the beginning of Eitz Chaim. I'm saying with differences.
Pri Eitz Chaim, what's that?
That's Kavanas. Pri Eitz Chaim is also, it's mostly Kavanas. Pri Eitz Chaim is structured around the Kavanas of Torah and of Tefillah and Mitzvahs. Mostly Kavanas.
He was only a half a year, he's Talmud, Reb Chaim Vital.
I know, I spoke about it at length on Friday. You were here?
Yeah.
For a year?
He was a half a year.
No, it was a little more than a half a year, I think. I think he was more than a half a year.
He came in the middle.
He came in the middle or he came from the beginning? The whole Arizal in Tzfas was a year and 8 months.
Yeah,
So,
this one.
I don't know if the Archav was there right immediately, but he must have been pretty close to the beginning.
Wow.
Yeah. You know that the Chidah in Sefer Shar Gedalim writes, Shem Gedalim rather, Chidah writes that the Reb Chaim Vital, when he passed away, he made it Tzavah. His Tzavah stated that everything, that all his writings should be buried with him.
Rizal made.
No, Reb Chaim Vital made. Are you listening?
So how do
Reb
we-
Chaim Vital made so 1 second, let me finish. This is the Shtei Sredin. Middle of a sentence. So, what?
It was buried with him.
It was buried with him. And Rav Shmuel of Vital, who was the son of Reb Chaim, made Bezdin and HaToras Neder. He basically, which was a big thing, because it's not just a neder, it's a tzavah mess. It's a big thing to override that. Wow. They dug up his grave and they took it out.
Wow.
That's how we have it. It's a Chidah writes. It's not hearsay.
Wow.
It's a reliable source.
The Rizal Pasha didn't have anybody before Tzfas, like real confidence or whatever.
Confidence? I don't know. He had Achir Shaleni, Elionov. He had a good set of friends. Talmidim, he had Talmidim. There's results of mysteries. I mean, we talked. His teacher was B'Tzal Ashkenazi, the Shita Mekubetzes in Egypt. I think that Rizal was born in Israel, then went to Egypt, studied with B'Tzal, and then moved back, and then ended up in Tzfas at the end of his life.
But his teacher was...
He's a very mysterious. Rizal is one of these enigmas, because everybody embraced him. That's the weirdest thing. Because who embraced anybody? Everybody in a year and a half, huh? Yeah, the Rav Zizals are gone in Nigla. By the way, you look in the Likutei Torah Larizal, you see. You look at his kavanas, you can see how he knows Gemara. It's not. You're not talking about a makubal.
Right.
By the way, that's one thing in Yiddishkeit. There's no such thing as a makubal that's not a gon in Nigla. That doesn't exist.
Split is very recent.
Huh?
The whole split is very recent.
It shows that it's not real. There's no such thing in Yiddishkeit. Rashbi was one of the Gainim of the Gainim. He was a Tana. Yeah.
He could have become a Rebbe.
Yeah. That's a very unique thing. By the way, Lahavdil, like Sufis were burned to this day because the traditional Muslims did not. The mysticism was like a aberration for them. I mean, I'm not trying to compare. By us, it was always Pnimis and Nigla went together with soul and body. It's not possible one without the other. You can't have one without the other. It's like saying a body without a soul or a soul without a body.
He was not his Rebbe in Kabbalah also, right?
Who knows? I'm not sure. It doesn't say clearly. I'm sure the Shita Mekubetzes knew a few things.
You learned with Eliyahu Hanavi?
Shita Mekubetzes, I don't know.
Yeah,
I don't know. Someone must have told them something. Where did he get it from?
No, I think it's known that the whole Jewish nation knows that everything that the Rizal said was material.
Yeah, they say that. They call him Gon Aliki, they call him Ish Aliki. I told you, but the Shalah writes. The Shalah is, maybe you don't need a better endorsement. The Shalah writes when he saw his writings. At the end of the Shalah's life, he said that since Matan Torah there was no such Giluim, there was no such Torah. From Matan Torah,
Wow.
which means more than Gemara, Mishnah, Zayar, everything. More from Matan Torah. I mean, it's not a popularity contest. He's saying the Giluyim, the Chidushim, that the Arizal were not said till since Matan Torah. In other words, that level of revelation. I mean, you don't need more. I mean, the whole Chassidus, this Chassidus is Ad Kisra Arizal. The Arizal Chidush Inyan Atzimtzum. We just learned the last chapter.
Gila.
Chidush, it says, and Gila sometimes also both.
How come he didn't write any of these things?
The Baal Shem Tov also didn't write. The Rashbi didn't write. You know, listen. There's different Zdarim. Most of that's all. I guess. I can't say why. Maybe it was that way. It was so sublime. Maybe writing was for him hard. I mean, Begashmis, you could say that Rachav is like a step away, so you could get it into words. I can only imagine some of these ideas are the words he used. Who knows? You don't even know what words he used, because Reb Chaim Vital is already using his language, and you could see. He says, you could see from Beitz Chaim that Reb Chaim Vital is saying it in his own language. You could see it clearly. He says, "Shemaiti memoire," Anyway, so Eitz Chaim, Mar v'Sharim are, but both talk about the Tzimtzum. So he says, "Masha achra Tzimtzum hutzach lis amshachas hakav." He's bringing now proof that Eir Pnimi is what shapes existence and not Eir Makif. So he says, like it says in Eitz Chaim, Mar v'Sharim. Masha Mar v'Sharim simply means the preface to the gates. So it could be the beginning, the introduction to all the gates. But everything is called Sha'arim by the Kabbalim, especially in Eitz Chaim. Everything is a Sha'ar, a gate. Sha'ar Ein Sof, Sha'ar this.
We had a parak on that also.
Yeah. Masha Acharat Tzimtzum. So it says there, Masha Acharat Tzimtzum Hutzach Lis Amshachas Hakav. Why after the Tzimtzum did you need to have Amshachas Hakav? Why did you need to have? I spoke about it before. Why did you need to have this flow, this transmission of the Kav means a line, but sometimes Kav Chut. Sometimes it says a line and a thread. So it's a narrow flow of light. I think of it like laser energy type. Shebeim hoya elam is kamoisha heim mitzada er makif. So why do you need the Kav? Because if the worlds would have been, if the states of consciousness, meaning all existence, would have been only from Er Makif, there would be no distinct levels at all, elements in the world. They would all be one level. The explanation there, let's see, does he say it here? The explanation there is like this. Think of it even mathematically. A circle, a real circle, everything is equal in the circle. There's nothing closer than anything else. There's no up and down. There's no right or left. A circle is a circle. Any point inside the circle, let's say what's it called? The center. Yeah, the radius is equal wherever you go. The diameter of the circle is equal in any direction. So, on the other hand, that's called a circle. Then there's a line. In a line may have infinite points, but a line is a measure. A line is the shortest distance between 2 points, and a line is absolutely measurable. So, for example, even in a circle, when we say a diameter, you can measure a diameter, and based on that, you can figure out the circumference. So the bottom line is, so in a sense, like what we call zeros and ones are circles and lines. So they are the basis of all creation. A circle is like what is an equalizer, and a line is a distinguisher. That's really what it comes down. So let's say if you were measuring now, you made a circle around this table. So you would have the perimeters of the table, but you wouldn't have the structure of the table. Then you'd have to drive a line and measure the width and the length. So a circle is gives you and you see even in engineering and architecture, you'll find this all the time. They will always make a circle around anything, and then they'll make the structure within it. Because the circle keeps the balance. And keeps a certain, it's like a level. It's like a level that keeps everything, what's the word? Not coordinated, synchronized. And the Kav is what gives the actual structure, the details. So there's a lot in engineering, in computer science, even in computer programming. There's a lot about these two aspects to it. So zeros and ones, circles and lines.
Digital creation.
Like for example, by a chuppah, there's a lot of circles. Make the circles. The ring is a circle. The chuppah is a circle. There's a makif, because that's the power there. But a makif is a uniter, and then the line is the so-called the penetrator, the details, the specifics. It's like the talis and the tzitzis. Talis is the makif, the garment, and the tzitzis is the pnimi. Everything. Sukkah and the Daled Minim. Sukkah is a makif, the Daled Minim is pnimi. L'kachtem lachem. Yeah, you always have that. Talis and tefillin. Same thing. Throughout the Yiddishkeit, any way you look, you say, you say, Asher Kedeshanu b'mitzvesa v'tzivanu. Okay, that's a makif, that goes on all mitzvahs. And then you say, Leishav Basukkah. Or whatever, on the Tilis Lulav, or on the Echt Film. So you have the Asher Kedeshanu b'mitzvesa v'tzivanu, that's the Kedeshanu, the mitzvah general, the tzava, and then the specific. The Kavanah Klali, Kavanah Prati, you can say. Kabbalah Soil, Shemachal Shemayim, Kabbalah Soil Mitzvahs. Shema, V'hayim Shemaya. I mean, wherever you turn, it's really a universal principle in all of Yiddishkeit, all of existence for that matter. The heavens, the earth. The heavens surround the earth. You have a lot about it, for example, in the argument between Moshe and Betzalel, when Moshe said, first build the Kelim and then build the Mishkan, and Betzalel said that's not the way of the world. First you build the structure, then you bring the Kelim. So Chassidus explains. Because Moshe was talking, the Kavanah was Yesher, Kav, Pnimi. So the Kavanah is not the structure, the Kavanah is the Kelim, the vessels with which you serve. And Betzalel was talking, in actuality, first you need the Makif, then you bring the Pnimi. But the Kavanah is Pnimi, not Makif. I mean, I can go on and on. You could find, this can explain hundreds of different halachas even, and mitzvahs and so on. You always need both elements. So basically he's saying, so if you only had the makif, you'd only have the everything would be one. And not this was the intention of the maitzel. This was not the purpose, the kavanah, the intention of the emanator, the source. But rather that there should be a seder v'adraga, there should be order and structure, and you could say gradations, you can say hierarchy. Elements in the world, in a state of descent, level after level. This is a very fundamental piece in general, just describing how existence comes to be. This is very consistent, as I said, back in the 30s, in the Amayim Bey's 30s, that is, not in the 1930s. So he speaks in the 30s, he speaks very much about how the structure comes into play, and discusses this at length. So the bottom line is, this also is very consistent with last chapter. Remember we said that Tzimtzum deals with the schism. There's infinite distance. So we know that Tzimtzum, because the Tzimtzum shows us that the creation came by God completely having to conceal His presence, which means it's infinitely distant. Then comes the Kav, which begins the revelation. But before the Kav, there's a Makif now. The Makif is a result of the Tzimtzum. Remember, the Tzimtzum creates the Igul HaGadol. So where does the divine presence rest before the Kav begins? In a form of Makif. And what would happen then? Everything would be equal.
Well, that's Ak.
So, well, not Ak. Ak is already comes after the Kav. Talking about the Igul HaGadol.
Oh, that's before.
Yeah. So if they only had Tzimtzum, he's not saying words, but it's similar. If you only had Tzimtzum, you'd only have Makif. If you only have Makif, you have an equalizer. Because everything is equal in the face of the divine. So you need to have now, the artist wants a structure. He doesn't just want to say that I'm infinitely distant from you, which would make no distinction. He wants distinctions.
You wouldn't have makif also if it will be only tzimtzum. Why should you have makif?
Correct. Technically you're right. But makif and makif that comes from tzimtzum without kav is very similar to the tzimtzum. It's a shalei be'erech dika energy. I agree. With tzimtzum, without makif, with only tzimtzum and nothing revelational, you don't have anything. You have just a black hole. I agree. But the revelation that would come without kav, for just a igul, would be one that would be an equalizer. Which goes back to what we spoke about. That would be not like the Ramak. The Ramak sees existence, ilah v'olol, that there's gradations and there's a relationship. But he's talking about Elokus already, how it relates to existence. The Tzimtzum Kipshute, that I discussed Friday. Tzimtzum Kipshute sees existence completely apart. And we only can relate to God as Shalei B'erech. The Ramesh Shita about Keser, Ein Sof, is also similar. So, seemingly. So that bottom line is the Makif does not allow for distinctions.
According to the Ramak, there was no tzimtzum.
I said to you Friday again, the Yoda, just like according to the Moshe Rabbeinu know about Shabbos elevator. It was not his time to know about it. That's the way to explain it. According to Ramak, Lo Yoda, it was not revealed to him the Tzimtzum. That's the way we would put it. He does not disagree. It was not revealed to him, and it was revealed to the Arizal.
Even Makiv, he didn't know Makiv.
Makiv, yeah. Makiv is not Tzimtzum.
So he had a concept of Makiv.
He had a concept also of Atzmus. So the question is whether we could understand it. Ramak's understanding of Atzmus was quite profound. He knew that God is infinitely distant. The question is, how do you explain it? And what type of language can you explain it? והכוונה בזה בכדי שיהיה מציאס יש הוא אין בירור הסיוגים והפסלס. הסיגים והפסלס. And the intention, which he says in the parentheses, he said this also earlier. What's the intention? Because if you're already speaking about why Taka, okay, you understand Makiv, now God wants Primi. Why does he want Primi? Because the intention of that, there should be Metzias Yesh. That there should be an existence of an entity that is self, that has a sense of self. And that is the birur, or that the purpose of that, it should really say. We should really say is the birur, the refinement of the sigim, of the offshoots and the waste, which means that once the energy manifests, he doesn't explain this at length here, but basically he's saying, I remember almost positive, a parenthesis very similar to this earlier, on the bottom left side of a page. Okay, we'll look later.
The word sigim and
similar. There was the kavanah. Why do you need pnimi? Because the purpose is dira b'tachtenim. For there to be tachtenim, you need to have gradations. To a point where the yesh is you sense yourself, and the energy of the divine energy is concealed. And the purpose of that is, in order to have the refinement, so you should remove the so-called excess and the distortions and the waste to reveal the divine within. So that's the purpose of all the gradations of the structure. And because that's the intention of the emanator, the source, then this purpose, there was the Hamshachas HaKav, the transmission of the Kav Shenim Shel B'chinas Kav Daka Mitzumtzum, that there should transmit a narrow, thin, or subtle, and diminished line of energy, ray of energy. Okay, so that's the kavanah. That should be a kav dakum tzumtzum, and the way it transmits the way it transmits that it's on the top of it, on the top edge of the kav. Negeiv a davuk be'ein sof. It touches and is cleaves to, connected to, attached to the divine infinite light of before the tzimtzum. And its lower side, the lower edge, the other side of the line, it's not attached to the transcendent infinite light energy. So if you look there in Eitz Chaim, he goes like this and says, Amovisharim too. He says the kav is a line. A line immediately means upper and lower. That's what a line is, as opposed to a circle. A circle, there's no top and bottom. Which is, by the way, why the Alter Rebbe explains in Tovkuf Samach Beis, brought in Hayem Yem, why we don't fall off the earth. Right? He says that the Technim, the astronomers, say one reason. And the reason is because earth and the worlds is a gulim, makifim, and a makif, there's no alien, there's no tachtim. So, okay, so that would be the circle. Comes the line, and the line creates levels. But he goes on, Eitz Chaim, he's not saying it here right now, unless later, that he asks, so how far does the kav go? If the kav goes all the way to the bottom, it says in Eitz Chaim, it defeats the purpose. Because then again there's no top and bottom. Because the bottom is just as close to the infinite energy as the top is. So the kav has to stop around 3/4 of the way down or 2/3 of the way down. I'm not talking begashmis, conceptually. That way, the lower part is more distant from the source than the upper part. So there's a real diminishing going on.
Why can't you have to travel up to Kav itself?
What?
If there's top and bottom in a Kav,
Right.
so the bottom you have to go up the whole entire Kav.
What?
You have to go up in levels the whole entire Kav.
So good. That's exactly the point.
So why does there have to be something afterwards?
There is nothing afterwards. It's where it stops.
To 3/4
It doesn't go all the way down, because then there would be no higher and lower again. You'd be back to square one.
It doesn't go all the way down to the bottom of the circle.
Right.
Why does it go past the middle?
It goes. What do you mean middle? I mean it goes as much as it has to go. It goes to it says Tachtis Atzilus. Sometimes it says to the bottom of Atzilus, the Kaven. Sometimes it says to the top of Atzilus.
The Ak is after the Kav, no?
Yeah, we're not talking about Ak now. We're talking about the Kav now.
Yeah,
the
but
Kav goes through all the Rishtalshalos.
Until Atzilus. The Kav goes through the whole Ishtalshalos?
Yeah,
The whole Ishtalshalos?
and it diminishes as it goes. It's diminished as
So
it
that
goes.
means the Kav is in everything.
Exactly, but except to a certain point. Some say it goes to the end of Ak. Sometimes it says it goes to. In Samach to Samach, he speaks about the different opinions of how far the Kav goes. And then, but you still have a reflection of the Kav. Even if the Kav ends, it's still a reflection of it to the lower levels. The Kav is always the force that brings energy into existence, even in our world. But it's only like, by us it's only a ha'ara of a ha'ara of a ha'ara. So it's like, you think of it like the sunlight, where the sun, think of it not sunlight. There's a sunlight, then think of a reflection of the light. Right, exactly.
I always thought it's called Kav because it's a very thin He'or. But now he said something else. That on top of the Kav is much higher than in the lower of the Kav.
It says everywhere that. You just didn't learn it, but it says it everywhere. That's the whole point of the Kav. If you look in Eitz Chaim, it's what it's the key. Is that the Kav itself is higher and lower. That means the Kav itself. The Kav is like think of it like a stylus. That ink is flowing through it. As the ink goes further, there's less and less ink. Simple as that. As it goes further, as it reaches further out. That's the point. So it's both things. It's narrow in that sense, but it also the gradations. And the reason, and like I just said, that's why it says la'asid lo, when Mashiach comes, the Kav will reach the bottom of the circle. So then you'll have the Pnimi and the Makif all together. It says that also.
We'll have before the Tzimtzum also, no?
Yeah, but it will be within the structure of existence, because we will have been able to contain it once you've integrated it. And because through this, it has in it the Kav higher and lower hierarchy. On the top edge, on the top point, it's the higher level. And the more it gets distant, the more it distances itself from its source, is a lower level. We learned this before also. This is like Ribui and Miyut. Or we said Kiruv and Richuk. Think of it like students of teacher. A teacher is teaching. Student continues to teach. It diminishes as it goes. In this case, I would say it's one teacher. It's the Kav. Yeah. Okay.
It's not one. Both is a Droge.
Yeah. Okay, and through this there is an order and a hierarchy in the worlds. And the primary hierarchy is in the energy. And the same thing, this we also learned before. We learned that Chochmah and Bina are not just different because Bina has less Eir, because it's a Keli that diminishes the Eir. The Eir HaChochmah is different than the Eir HaBina. It's fundamentally a different type of entity. And same thing, the Ishtalshus Madrega all this was back in the 30 chapters, in the mid-30s. Same thing, the Ishtalshus, the hierarchy, the Ishtalshus, the evolution from level to level, in the diminishing of energy commensurate to one another. In other words, we're not talking here, this is critical, we're not just talking, it's the Kav, we're not talking that the Kalim, in other words, the Kav, you could say, is an equalizer, has one equal energy, and is the container, each container takes it according to this. You know those little those toys, where you pour water into this thing, so the wide pipes take wide, and the narrow take narrow. No, that's not what we're talking about. The Eir itself is made up of this structure, because we learned earlier, according to Einayim Beis, he's going according to the opinion that the Eiris are not pshutim, that the energies are not seamless, that the energies have in them definition, except they are relative to the containers, not tangible yet, not defined. However, even though it's in the energy, through this becomes the order and hierarchy in the world, because the worlds are created from the energy. That's why, according to the energy, that's how the world is shaped. So think of it like this: the artist is using his paintbrush, but as we spoke, the paintbrush, just think of this paintbrush as one that has paint in it, and can also regulate the flow. And as he works with it, as he goes downward, he's painting the images, and then the lower levels have a less amount of energy in them, less ink or whatever you want to call it, or less kavana, less spirit. And based on how much he's so-called pressing, or pressed on how much he's pressuring this pipe, that's how the shape of the entity is shaped. That's how he's explaining it here. And he's giving out, for example, like an example, letters of thought and letters of speech. They are distant relatively to one another. The letters in thought are not sensed. You don't feel them. When you're thinking an idea, the idea is the primary sensation you have. There are letters there because every idea has to have some form of expression. And also, if you're thinking what you're going to say, the letters begin to form. But even there, they're relatively not murgish. Dibur murgish el hazulas. And the letters in dibur are absolutely sensed. You hear a person speak, you hear words, you hear expressions, you hear different letters being expressed. And nevertheless, even though in speech it's now sensed, but it's an orderly way. It's not just, words just come out that makes without any structure or hierarchy. So in other words, even in machshava they're in order, and also in dibur, because according to the seichel, according to the way the seichel irradiates, illuminates in thought, that's how the letters in thought are. So there the seichel is more intense. So therefore the letters are less sensed. And according to the way the energy, the intelligence radiates in the words, that's how the letters emerge. I'm not sure what he's saying here. Let me just think this through a second. What's the example? But he wants to say that according to the air, that's how the shape becomes. So why is he using machshava and dibur?
Dibur parallel to the machshava.
I thought dibur was like kalim. That's what I started thinking. Hold on a second. But if he just said machshava, it would also work. That according to the energy, that's how the ideas comes out. They're in an orderly way. Why does he have to speak that they're be'erk shein rechekim be'erk hamzalas?
Saying that machshava and dibur have different energies.
Okay, let me just see the end here. Kamoy kain, the same thing. Who be'elam is in the world. According to the energy, that's how the world is. I think he wants to just say, he's not really comparing machshava and dibur. He just wants to say, you see the same idea, based on the energy in the machshava, the letters are more sublime. Based on the energy, as in dibur, the letters are more tangible. So you see that the idea, that the expression is according to the energy. That's really what he wants to say. He's not really trying to say. I thought first he was saying that even dibur comes from machshava. He's just speaking about different types here. Different types of creation. Hold on a second. Yeah, but he could have used the example just of dibur. He could have said kamei sisa dibur. That based on the energy, that's how the ideas come out in an orderly fashion. Why do you need machshav? Why do you need to compare machshav and dibur? That's what I'm not so clear about. Hold on, machshav is usually bria. No, machshav is usually bria, and dibur is yitzira.
What's the problem? Order machshava is it was higher, sublime, light.
No, that I understand. But why does he need to bring both? He could just have said it, even if you just use dibur and no machshav. It would also be an example. No?
He wants to compare the two.
Why?
The oilam on the side, the or. The oilam is at the higher level because the or is at a higher level.
Okay.
The oilam is at a lower level are a deeper kind of or.
Yeah. Okay, so you have two elements, like machshava dibur, like two elements. Okay, that's the reason. So he's like bringing two levels, two dimensions, and they're both according to the, because there's 2 points here. One is to say that the elements are the Fia Air. And the other is to say, okay, to bring in two elements as an example. Okay, probably, right. Good. Let's look at the elaboration here, is amazing. And the order in this, who beginnest am Metzias the Elam, shenisav madrega al yen shebekav ein beginnest Metzias, v'chol ma sheyer l'mat nas beginnest Metzias is. Oh, sorry. V'hadrog b'zeh beginnest am Metzias. And now he's going further. What really defines the hierarchy? What defines a higher level or lower level? What does it mean, higher or lower? In Dibur and Machshava, it's tangible. Nirgish. The letters in thought are less tangible, and Dibur is what? What is it in Elamus? That's what he's saying here. So he's also saying it's Metzias. It's in the state of Metzias. How much, that's called substance. How much identity or substance, Metzias here would be a tangible identity. The Elam Shenisam Madregel Yenush Bekav, world that is shaped from a higher level in the Kav. Ein B'chinas Metzias is not in the state of Metzias that you can say a substantial substance. It's interesting. He doesn't say in B'chinas Metzias Kol Kach. He says it altogether no Metzias. And when he says when it goes down, he says it becomes more Metzias. Metzias Yeser. In other words, it begins with almost no Metzias. That's what he's saying. It begins no Metzias and becomes Metzias. By the way, all this is coming to explain Ak. Because remember, by understanding, you see, if you didn't have all these gradations, you could say, what do you need an interface for? But because there's because of all the pratim, remember, Ak is the klal. So in order to, if you understand the power of the klal as an interface, you have to understand how important the details are. Because the details are so fundamental and inherent. So that's the thing. So Metzias now he's going to. There's a lot of points in this whole thing here. How he explains the whole dynamics of structure. Really, it's really fascinating. This is like a real anatomy, dissecting the anatomy of structure. So now it's Metzias, and what's weiter? What lower it goes, the more it becomes a Metzias. Now there's more substantial. I guess you could say it's almost like the difference in a seed and a tree. In a seed, you have some substance, but you can't compare it. The tree is much more Metzias. That's, as it goes down and diminishes, that's what happens. Oh, now he's saying, in truth, right? Yeah, that's why I didn't say it. He's really saving it for the. In truth, the hierarchy in the energy is also a state of Metzias. The b'chinas al yenush al kavu eina b'chinas Metzias eir. No. He's saying no. I'm sorry. I didn't read it right. He's saying that droge of what? Of the Elamis is Metzias. Now he's saying that droge in the Eir is also Metzias. In other words, what distinguishes one level of energy to another, not just what it shapes. The energy itself is also a Metzias. Because the higher state of the Kav, the higher level of the Kav is not yet a Metzias Eir that you can call it a substance. As the Kav, as that line of energy, distances from the source, it becomes a more substantial Eir. It would be like the sun. Imagine the light right outside of the sun. Outside the sun, you couldn't even tell it's light. The sun is so dominant there. But as the light travels farther away from the sun to earth, it becomes a Metzias, to the point where we can see it. We don't get burned up by it. So clearly it's been diminished. In other words, so the formula goes like this. The more intense, the more closer to the source, the higher, the less substantial it is. The more diminished, the more substantial it becomes. In the air. We're not even talking now Kalim. We're talking about even in the air. So the Elamis works that way, and also in the air he says Be'emes is that way.
The Elamis is Kalim?
The Elamis here probably Kalim, the structure of existence. He doesn't say Kalim because he's speaking the general realms. But the Elamis is definitely the substance. Yeah, I have to say something like that. Collective Kalim. Just in general, even the lower levels of that, even the diminished, is a state of ayin. Va'elam is b'chlal in b'chinas Metzias. That's the qualification here. That an Oyer in general is a state of ayin. Meaning ayin means a state of bittul, basically. A state of, it's not substance. Because even Oyer, even sunlight down on earth, you can't compare to a plant. Or to our eyes, or to something that is benefiting or absorbing the sunlight. Because at the end of the day, light is more subtle, and a state of without the moyer, take away the source, the light disappears. So even in its lowest state, is still a state of ayin relative to kelim, to eilemus. Whereas eilemus in general, b'chal b'chinas mitzias. Eilemus, even the highest ones, are already dealing with something that is of substance. Okay, so we have here both the world is on higher, but what the difference is, the gradation works that the Eilim is when they're higher up, they're not Mitzias, then they become more Mitzias, and the Eir also, fundamentally, is also that way, even though in general this one is Ayin, this one is Mitzias, Ayin Yesha. Oh, here we go. V'yesh ba'er b'chinas ha-metzias, u'ba'el metzias gam ken b'chinas heder ha-metzias. Just in case you think he wasn't being thorough enough, huh?
Just in case you thought you were on solid ground.
Right. No, actually, this is being thorough. He's really covering every base here. So in the energy there's a metzias, and the elam is there's also heder ha-metzias. You see, this lines like this, you're not going to find in any other Maimorim, even in the Rebbe Rashav Maimorim. The elaboration here, the spelling it out like this. Well, even though pieces like this may be from the Mittler Rebbe, but I'm almost sure this is his own addition. In other words, what he's, even though it seems tangential, what he's really touching upon here is again the interface. Remember, we're talking here about bringing together Ayin and Yesh, right? Ayin and Mitzias. So you hear again in the Eir Pnimi, as it goes down, you see both. You see how Ayin is becoming more Mitzias, and Mitzias is becoming more Ayin, both ways.
What is Heder
Heder Mitzias is Ayin. Lack of substance. Well, if Eifnei Chenu HaMitzias Shel Eilemus, and according to the way the Eir is, that's how the Mitzias of the worlds are. In other words, when the Eir is more Ayin, the worlds also become more Ayin. In other words, if you want to be mashpia on the Grubba Jung, you better be Edel yourself. Basically. If you want to refine something, you have to be, the air has to be refined if it wants to refine something. You can't. Hira b'peil.
It says also the opposite.
However, in general, now he's going further. He says, in general.
It's good.
Oh, I'm sorry. Yeah. Well, and in detail, when you break it down in detail, there are infinite. Ribui Revavis is basically multitude. Ribui Revavis means tens and tens of thousands. Tens of thousands of tens of thousands. Like hundreds of thousands. Ribui Revava actually would be a million.
10,000 times.
Well, that's 100,000.
It's 10 times that.
10,000 times 10,000
No,
is 100,000. What?
A lot. I don't know if it means Ribui Revava.
Yeah, Revava means 10,000. Ribui Revava is 10 times. Ribui Revava means tens of thousands of tens of thousands. Many.
1,000 times, not 10 times 10,000.
Okay. No, tens of thousands times tens of thousands.
That's right. It's millions.
You got it.
Come on.
The bottom line is who's counting?
Tens of millions.
Okay. Now sometimes there's a diuk in Ribui Revavos. Here it's not.
Orientation to 231 gates. These guys, talked about it. So.
Everyone's come alive, I see. With this
So we can relate it.
This we know how to figure.
How much I gotta earn next year?
Like the guy said, what are you teaching me all these things? Give me something I can count.
Yeah.
It's less than the winner of the lottery. It was hundreds of millions.
590.
It's less than the U.S. deficit. There's millions of levels from the beginning of creation, of coming into being, until it becomes a state of substance, of identity. So even though there are really so many, in general it comes down to 3 levels. He's going to now explain it's Chemet, Suda, and Tikkun. The 3 stages are Chemet, Suda, and Tikkun, which earlier, if you remember in Hemshech, he spoke about Nekuda, Kav, and Shatach, and he also spoke about Nekuda, Sfira, Partzuf, which have commonality with what we're going to learn now. So he's breaking now down the structure of existence into 3 stages. The first is B'chinas Chemer Pashat, She'en Bei Shum Tzura. The beginning of everything is a Chemer Pashat. Think of it like a 1 cell, or a seed, or a raw matter. Has no shape at all. A raw a piece of clay. She'ezein hapshitus. What means that it's raw and unshaped? That's pshitus. Pshitus literally means, as we've discussed many times, plainness. Pshitus can be just plainness, something that's plain. It could also mean seamless. It could also mean simplicity, simple. But what he means here, not simple as in simple as opposed to profound. He means here simple as opposed to shape. So it's like, that's why it's seamless. Think of it like, a ball of wax. It has no shape, no form. A ball of a piece of gold. It's not been shaped into any ornament.
Like the Big Bang, beginning of the Big Bang.
It's like a seed. The truth is, a seed is usually best. Sometimes the chemer hiyuli is the expression. Hiyuli means like potential, but chemer is essentially an entity that is yet to be defined or shaped. Sometimes it can be the outline of something. It can be the skeleton. I mean, there's a lot of ways to define chemer. But let's continue. It's pshitus. It doesn't have any shape at all. That's how he's defining Metzias now. Metzias is shape. That means it's not yet a Metzias. It's a chemer, but that's not called Metzias in this context. So it's Metzias as far as you have already a piece of clay. It's closer, a piece of clay, to what is going to be shaped into than a piece of clay from no clay. But when you're talking in context of tangible, of something, basically, I guess, utilitarian, it's chemer. And also in Ruchnius, you have to remember, there's no physical clay. In Ruchnius, when you say something is just a nucleus, you're speaking of something is just an energy. It's not yet been shaped. Like you could say a quantum state even, by the way. This chemer could be quantum. It could be basically like a subatomic particle. That's not yet been.
Even less than that.
Yeah, I mean, chemer can be explained in physical terms. You can explain in ruchnistic terms in many levels. Sometimes chemer, for example, chachma sometimes is seen as chemer, and bina is seen as surah.
All possibilities.
Okay. Because every existence must have some shape. What form does it take? How does it manifest? Like in a physical yesh gashmi. Now he's not talking about chemer and ruchni. Yesh gashmi. In a physical piece of matter. It has to have some parameters. It has to have some measurements. Im bal zovius, whether it has edges, in other words, like a square. Bal zovius means that it's made of sides. Oy ogul, or ogul, or it's round. But some type of parameters it has to have. Either it's round, or it's square, or it's bound by Bal Zovius means actually a thing that has made up of sides, made up of angles and edges, actually edges and walls. Shazo Hagbalose, that's its parameters, that's its definition, that's its defined state. Ubezehu nitvus, and that it manifests, and within it is graspable. Is really nitfus means bezehu nitfus, and that it's how it's defined, how it's manifested. No. Maybe that with this we can typhus it, with this we can hold it. You could say with this we can grasp it. We can hold it. I don't know if it's understanding.
You recognize the entity.
No, it could be that with this it manifests, and also with this we can hold on to it in some way. Thank you. And the same thing with every Metzias Dover, not just the Yesh. Let's talk about an idea. An idea, 2 + 2 is 4. It has parameters. That's a tzir. Everything that's a Metzias Dover, anything that exists, has to by necessity, necessitates that it has to have some shape. Even if you say it's shapeless, it's still a shape. That's also a definition. Say, let's say a shapeless ball of clay. So it's a ball. It doesn't have no tzir at all. V'achemer ha'poshet mishum tzura hu she'einu b'chinas metziasa. No, mishum tzura is poshet mishum tzura. That's what he means. V'achemer ha'poshet mishum tzura. Yeah, that's what he means. The chemer ha-poshet mishum tzura, and a chemer that is poshet means poshet actually here means abstracted from, like removed from poshet. 1 second, mishum tzura, from any shape, hu she'einu b'chinas metzias adayin, is it means that it's not yet in any type of existence. So in other words, if you were to say on earth, when we talk about the chemer hiyuli of, let's say, Eish, Ruach, Mayim, Ofar, as we learned earlier, Eish and Mayim can reside side by side in the Yesod. Yesod the Eish, because they're not fire and water. They're archetypes. That's a chemer. So chemer here is not an unshaped piece of earth, and then you shape it into man, let's say. Chemer here means it's not even a piece of earth. It's the concept of earth. It's the root of it, the archetype of it. So it has no metzias yet. Then once you become
talking about physical things.
We just spoke about the physical. He's speaking about physical and spiritual. He's speaking about both.
So there is something there. It doesn't
no,
have
no, you missed it. We just spoke about this for a while.
Physics.
It was Greek. The Greeks talk about it, but it's also the Rambam talks about it, and we have in Chassidus the Chemer.
Is it Makar from Talmudic, or is it Makar from the
Hiyuli?
No, the Homo Pashi, not Hiyuli, Homo Pashi, and the Dalit.
It's not so clear. Medrash mentions it. Some say the Rambam took it from some Greek ideas, Greek philosophy. But others explain it. They find it also in the Torah, hinted to in different places. Also, the beginning of creation, Bereshis, bara. What did God create? A chemer. The Ramban says He created a chemer hiyuli. So you have the concept of a chemer hiyuli. The language, I'm not sure. Anyway, so bottom line is that the chemer poshet. Yes, relatively speaking, in physical world, a chemer poshet would be a raw piece of clay, a shaped piece of clay, and then the finished product. But he's speaking here deeper than that. He's saying anything that is metzias has to have shape. What we're talking chemer here means it has no shape, means it has no metzias. So that's much more abstract, and we have to understand it more like an archetype. I don't see how you could define it in physical terms, because anything physical has to have some type of parameters, even if it's rough. That's what he's saying. Relatively speaking, you have it within Gashmis also, but here he's speaking that the yesh, no matter what. So he says, "B'chol davar, you need something that exists must have a way." When you say existent, what does that mean? It means it has handles, it has parameters, it has.
Metzias means it's found. It's findable.
But means that, but it has definition.
Yeah, exactly. You're able to deal.
So that it has tzura. That means it has tzura. That's exactly what he's saying.
Okay. Okay.
Well, thank you. You're agreeing with the Rebbe Rashab.
I was agreeing with the way. Your partner, I was agreeing with the way you express it.
No, but the Rebbe Rashab is saying that tzura here and metzias are synonymous. If it has metzias, it has to have tzura. Yeah. That's all that he's saying. He doesn't mean metzias the way metzias. We could say even area that has no tzir also has metzias. Area in Sof Lifnei Tzimtzum also has metzias. That's not what he's talking about here.
I was trying to learn from the word itself, like matzi, to bring out. It means something is.
But he's not saying that here. He's saying just metzias means. Here he definitely means metzias in existence. It exists.
So what is the
Look, Chemer also
what is
exists.
the tziyur the Chemer HaPashut? Take a level Gashmi. What is the tziyur Chemer HaPashut? She'enoi.
There is no tzir. There is no tzir in the Chemer HaPashut. There's no such thing. Chemer HaPashut is an archetype. It's not a Gashmizdika thing. That's right.
Cup. What is
There is no Chemer HaPashut. This cup is already a tzir. That's the point. This is a Metzias. This cup is a Metzias. It's not a Chemer HaPashut.
And an idea of a cup is also...
It's exactly the point.
And an idea of a cup is also...
That's,
the level in
no, there isn't. Who said?
He said B'chol Davar.
Did you? Why don't you read the last 5 lines? We just discussed it. It's telling the Yesh Gashmi. You have to say it has to have Ksovas. That's Tziyur. That's it. So Chemer is beyond that. So you have to say Chemer is not to have Tziyur. The same thing. Everything has to have a Tziyur. And Chemer HaPashut Mishum Tzura She'ein Metzias. That means it's not a Metzias. Get out of your head what you think Chemer HaPashut is. Chemer HaPashut has no Tziyur. That's the bottom line. If it has Tziyur, it's not Chemer HaPashut. You understand?
It's not, no.
Okay, but he's saying it about. I understand that this is already after the tziyur, but there was a stage that it was not.
And they didn't have Tziyur.
So
That stage has no Tziyur.
It means it's absolutely not knowable.
It means it's absolutely not tangible. It's an archetype. It's like the source of it or something.
It's nothing in the grass.
I told you, the Eish Yesod HaEish. Did you hear what I said about Yesod HaEish, Yesod HaMayim?
it's not fire. It's not.
What is it? It's an archetype. You know what an archetype is? Archetype means it's a personality.
Okay.
Even there it has Tziyur, so it's Eish and Mayim. But we're talking, everything is relative here.
Could we read another one?
Yeah. Compared to ayin ve'efes hamuchla, total and absolute nothingness and nothingness. Efes is always more than ayin. Nikri yesh, the chemer is called yesh. Yesh. What does it mean that it's called yesh? Is because you can't say it's nothing at all. But not because it's a yesh. It's only relative. So something that truly has no substance at all is called true ayin. Compared to that, the chemer HaPashut is called yesh. But compared to the tzura, thing of shape, the chemer HaPashut is in a state of no tzir, no ayin, no mitzias. That's why I always use the example of the cell. When a child is conceived, a newborn child, what does the first cell look like? You can't call it any type of tzir. There's no tzir there. I mean, again, relative to the ayin before, there's a tzir. Because it's already, something has been fertilized.
You mean there's no tzir other?
Yeah. I'm just giving an example of a state compared to... but a cell, if you saw it, you would not know that a child has been conceived. It would be, first of all, it's almost invisible. Secondly, even if you could see it under a microscope, it doesn't look like anything. We just know from what happens later that there was something there, which is also going to happen with the chemer HaPashut. From the tzura, you're going to know there's a chemer. Basically, you have to be able to abstract and understand what means that something comes into existence. Let's speak about a second before the conception. A second before the seed, a second before the seed was fertilized, the egg is fertilized. What happens? That's what I'm trying to say. So you see, there's a very subtle point. Or when you plant a seed in the ground, so the seed, if someone takes it out of the ground and 5 minutes later, the seed will not bear anything. So it's not like the seed is automatically going to bear a tree. It has to stay in the ground, has to be watered, has to be healthy, etc. On the other hand, the seed, you look at it, as I said, it will become later, but it's relatively a chemer pashut. I can't say it's completely what he's saying here, because he's saying, because even a seed you can measure. Seed is 1 inch, it looks like this, it's an apple seed, looks different than a tomato seed. So obviously there's a difference. I'm just using examples. You have to go a step further, like the state before the seed. I would say like the keach et sameach in the earth. What exists in the earth that doesn't exist on this table that makes a seed grow? and when the seed gets rots, and gets absorbed into that earth, it suddenly becomes a tree. Remember, the seed will not become the tree. The seed has to lose itself. So what does lose itself in? So there's a state of ayin that's clearly no tzuda. So I would take it's like almost the ayin between yesh and yesh that's very much like this chemer. I'm just going all the way to what because he wants to bring the chemer out as being something almost no metzius. So the ayin between the seed becoming a tree or a sapling, that ayin you can't call it yesh, but you can't call it really ayin. It's not ayin amiti. It's not ayin because something's going to come from this. So he's trying to give us an image of something that has become completely shapeless, has no form or shape, but you can't call it complete nothingness either. Complete nothingness is nothing. That would be if God doesn't want the world, then there's no existence, and then nothing has to exist. But existence itself, for existence to be, it has to begin with a state of complete, a complete shapeless reality. I'm not saying it's easy to understand. No, it's easier to understand it in physical terms. A raw piece of clay, a shaped piece of clay, and a final product. But he's going further here. He wants to say any tzura. I would think this example, back to the example I used before. The nefesh. Keiches atzmim in the nefesh. Nefesh nesa keiches. So the nefesh has the power to conceive of ideas. But it's not even a keich hamaskil yet. You're not even in an unconscious state. It's definitely not chokhmah, which is already an idea. Definitely not bina, where it's fleshed out. So how is the chokhmah inside your nefesh? You can't call it ayin efes hamuchlit, because it's not. It's not nothing. But you can't call it yesh, because it has no shape and form. And yet, if you didn't have a soul, you wouldn't be able to conceive ideas. But someone would dig into the soul and dissect it, you're not going to find chokhmah in there. I mean, I'm trying to. These are examples of a state of a chemer.
But it is potential.
It is and it isn't. It is, but without any way that we. It is without any way we can measure. Let's put it that way. It's not measurable. That's really chemer here.
Yeah.
You could say power of potential. Absolutely, potential power. Yeah, an innate potential power. Absolutely. He's not using that example here. I don't know why, but that maybe that because we usually think of chemer the other way around. We think of chemer the raw matter, and surah is already edeler. It's a shape, and then you have a product. Here he's going chemer as the beginning of all reality begins, like the state right before the Big Bang. Yeah, how the scientists would call the moment before the Big Bang. So what is that?
He's saying that in
okay.
a few words.
Let's go. Right. It's not nothing, but it's not yet a yesh, basically. Not yet. Now he says loishu. It's not yet. It's not only doesn't say not yet. It doesn't say shu adayin. He says shu yesh. It's not yesh. Deliyas ayin v'yesh muvdalim be'erech. Being that ayin and yesh are relatively separate, she'ena shaykh mamutza b'neihem. They are. V'dalim be'erech sometimes means relatively, sometimes infinitely. They're not capable of having an interface between them. Okay, masha ayin ayin hadizeh yesh. This is a good twister.
Yeah. That's what he's trying to do.
Like because of Sharias HaMetzias. Yeah, I understand. That's what he's going to say, of Sharias HaMetzias. So he says like this. Being that ayin and yesh are completely separate entities, so like he said earlier about the Pnei HaTzimtzum, right? It is of this, they're completely not relative to each other, so they can't have an interface. So in other words, you cannot have what he's saying like this. Here's what he's saying. You cannot have three stages. You can't have three stages where you say stage one is absolute nothingness. Stage two, that nothingness has become something, but you can't call it something, and then something. Because there's no bridge between state of nothingness and somethingness, so to speak. So you have to say that the ayin of the chemer is not a mamutza between the ayin amiti and the yesh. The ayin of the chemer is simply not yesh, but you can't call it true ayin either. That's what I think he's saying. You agree? question is, how do you envision true ayin, amiti?
He said, 2 lines later, he said.
But it's not a state of yesh, it's only a state of potential. There you go, potential existence. The ayin hu b'chinas afisas hametzias. Ayin amiti, the true ayin is afisas hametzias, means v'hedre.
Nothing.
Complete, right? Afisas hametzias means the nullification of existence, v'hedre. And it's, hedre, afisas hametzias means the nothingness of existence, v'hedre, and its nullification. V'achem ha'poshet hu she'efshali is b'chinas hametzias. Achem ha'poshet is saying that there could be a metzias. In other words, so saying that something could be an existence is not a mamutza, because ayin is you need something else to make it. Someone has to want that. The mamutza part is getting me exactly. Why didn't it say so? There's no mamutza between ayin, because the sikak is going to be a mamutza. That's why he wants the mamutza. So there's no mamutza. That's the tzimtzum. That's why there's a tzimtzum from the ayin before the tzimtzum, which is complete nothingness of based on our existence. There's complete nothingness there. You cannot have a mamutza. There's nothing that can jump from that to the possibility of mitzias. Because if it did jump to possibility, then it would be again be'erach zavazah. Right, exactly. It would be like the Ramak. So to say, let's say, the 10 hidden spheres before the tzimtzum are envisioned by the blig vul, you have to say they're so blig vul, even though relatively to them, but bottom line is, then it doesn't cause any type of similarity. One says at tzimtzum, you can talk about similarity because it was rooted there. But from its perspective, basically from chesed and 10 hidden spheres, chesed of Atzilus has absolutely no value at all. It's meaningless. That's hard to understand why. But that's what he's saying. Because you cannot, because it's a complete ayin amiti.
There's no bridge between 0 and 1.
Because it's not comparing or mitzvah to its makar. Here we're talking about
the bridge is when one realizes that there's no bridge between 1 and 0, that's when they begin to can have a relationship. That's what we learned. That's what the tzimtzum does. Oh, this is very abstract. It's got to be figured out. So in other words, from the perspective from above, it's completely nullified. There's nothing. It's like saying from Elikus, does the world exist? Not talking about Atzmus now. From Das Elyon, no, there's no existence. Absolutely meaningless. It's only energy. 1 second, hold on. It's only energy. From that perspective, that can't become a yesh. So you need to have a chaymer. So once there's the jump, there's the chaymer.
I'll call you back.
The ainu b'chinas ein ze rak mashanis. The ein ze rak mashanis mokam l'tzias. Now he goes further, and it's not just that it gives room for existence.
This is efshali as b'chinas hamitzius.
And when this in mokam l'tzias is what the tzimtzum does. The tzimtzum gives space because it's moved back, so it's given room. Here you're talking about something that is already the so-called the beginnings, the early seeds of a possibility of existence. This needs good explanation to understand it.
Can I just say, I don't know if this will help.
One second. Just give me 1 second. No, I want to hear what you're saying. Go ahead.
I recommended to Eliezer that he look at Brian Greene's piece on quantum mechanics on the internet. So it has a nice picture there.
Go ahead.
Of electrons spinning in concentric circles. Okay? And he says, what is the quantum loop? When this electron moves from one circle to another circle, with no trace, absolutely zero trace of any possible way, or zero time, or any force to put across that. And it was completely inerrant, yet they connect. I don't know if it's help or hinder the discussion.
I will say the following. And then I think we'll stop here. What I would say was I was going to say the following. It's very abstract, and we've got to find good examples for it. That's the real challenge here, which I'm thinking of right now. Now, the example you're giving fits. I'll tell you what it comes down to. like when they speak in the science about the Big Bang, so they say there was something there. There was a soup of gases. And then the right mixture came and exploded, and new entities were created. New, not completely new, but new in any practical way, because it created life. So let's even go with that approach. That let's say is the level of Breishis Bara Lakim and Va'aretz Eisatoyev Avoyu, and something happened there.
That's the Ramak.
One second. But when you ask the question, who put the soup there? And that, there's nothing that there's no bridge, as you said. So you have to say there's a will of something, what they call the entropic principle, or God, the entropic principle.
Entropic?
Yeah, some call it that. Well, it comes down to this, that the odds that everything should lead to life as we know it is simply astronomically impossible. We only need one thing to not work. That there should be that life should work perfectly here. But forget about the matter of design. The point I'm making here is that there's a leap, what we would call the desire that God wants this to happen. So there's nothing in the I'm not talking about Koyach Atzmus and Kol Yachol and God can do anything. I'm not talking about that. We're talking about once there is a divine state of consciousness, a divine existence, there's nothing in it that would make a yesh. That's why he says in Ageres HaKedesh, Hu levade b'keicha v'yicholte, only Atzmus can create a yesh.
We were discussing this last week when I was...
Right, but the Tzimtzum, you asked me about the Tzimtzum. The Tzimtzum allows the process to happen. The Tzimtzum is the process. How? Hold on. But my point is, what I'm trying to say is, that there's nothing that will make ayin become a yesh.
Right.
That's why we human beings can't create ayin to yesh. We can't create yesh b'ayin. Whatever we do is ultimately we take from a yesh. We make a yesh. Even a newborn child, we can't create that. We can replicate what they do in a lab. And we can replicate, in other words, what nature does, or what the husband and wife do in a lab. You're taking an egg and fertilize it. But it's not like that joke where the scientist says, "I can do whatever you can do." It tells God. And it says, "I can make things grow also." So he takes a bunch of earth. So God says, "Show me." He takes a bunch of earth. So God says, "Use your own earth." Right. So my point is that I think that the key here is, and I think it goes back to the point of the Tzimtzum. He wants to make the case that the jump from zero to Chaimer does not happen without some type of absolute quantum leap of the divine power to conceal. The Ramak doesn't the Ramak doesn't deal with that jump. The Ramak deals after the jump and says, I'll deal with how a Lakus wants a world already. Right. But from how he got from not wanting to wanting, or from not wanting, or from a state that is completely beyond. So by him it comes down to actually from a Atzmus that's beyond, and then he wants. So once he wants, I'll give you the steps from the Big Bang and on. Yeah. Whereas the Arizal, the Tzimtzum allows us to go further and says we actually have a mechanism to understand a jump from complete divine to leaving room for existence. Then comes the Kav and creates the Chaimer. So now you have, once the Ayin V'Efes HaMuchlat was dealt with, now you're going to the Yesh. And how does that begin? With Chaimer, with Afshariyas HaMetzias. But Afshariyas HaMetzias is not Ayin Mamish. That's the bottom line.
So what do you have a hard time with it?
It's not Ayin Mamish. What's that? Havalishah becomes Metzias here. It's Afshariyas HaMetzias. Afshariyas HaMetzias is not the state before the Tzimtzum. According to the Ramak, he starts with Afshariyas HaMetzias. And we cannot, if you want to understand the divine beyond that, divine is not Afshariyas. Divine is not a potential state for existence. It doesn't even leave room for it.
It's after the Tzimtzum.
That's why Atik is Tachtena Sheba, and that's the 10 hidden spheres. The 10 hidden spheres is not that God is relating to existence, is that God in His infinite power has element also to create 10 spheres. That's what it is. It's not a relationship.
What's Tachtena Sheba Maitzel?
That's the key. That's a key point.
This is Afshariyas HaMetzias. The Esach spheres.
No, they're not.
Why not?
What is Tachtena Sheba?
Because they're beyond. They're infinitely beyond. If they were, what do we need a Tzimtzum for?
What word did he use for Tachtena?
What do you need a full Tzimtzum? Just to reveal the 10 hidden spheres.
Atik, that's what I thought before.
Yeah.
And you said that was, but that's... It's the lower part.
Okay, so in other words, well, no, I discussed this previously. It means that the way God sees the structure of existence is a medida atzmis. It's the way God, medida by Him is just like beli medida. It doesn't have anything to do with existence. It's simply His will to be able. It's like Torah, the medida atzmis of Torah. That it's like His essence wants to express itself now in structure. It has nothing to do with structure. It's not because we relate to Him. It's because He wants to relate to us. That's a whole different story.
Is this Kav?
The Kav is a revelation of that. Yes, the Kav.
But he's talking about the Psharas and Metzias.
Psharas and Metzias is a lower level than what I just described. I'm trying to reconcile something that we've been talking. It's not right here. I'm trying to figure out how the 10 hidden spheres. The 10 hidden spheres is completely beyond. I don't want to confuse matters. Let's go back to what he's saying here. Basically, is that Ayin ve'efes hamuchel, the Eir lifnei hatzimtzum is completely, does not leave room for anything. There's no mokum for Eir, nothing. Once there's a tzimtzum, now begins of sharis hametzias. Now becomes the possibility, that's chaymer. So it's not ayin, amiti. There's no mamutza to that ayin. There's a mamutza. The Ramak understands there is a mamutza because he's dealing not with that ayin amiti, he's dealing with an ayin that's relative to the existence. The Ramak would be dealing more with chaymer.
This is Kav.
I don't know what you mean by kav. Kav is no.
The tzimtzum, it's the Psharas and Metzias is the kav. The Psharas.
He didn't finish. He's saying there are 3 levels in how the kav manifests.
Mak doesn't have kav. It doesn't have kav.
What?
Mak has a kav.
Yeah, the kav. Mak a kav. I don't know. It's a good question. He definitely has eir. I don't know if he calls it a kav. He may not call it a kav. I have to check. It's a good question. There is Butzina, no, there's Butzina de Kardinissa, the Ramak has Butzina de Kardinissa, so there's a Kav. Yeah, he has definitely a Kav, a ray of light. But it's a different type. Once a ray of light without symptom, it works differently. It just, no, he has to have it. There, of course there's a, and there's also, there's Butzina, there's the light that we spoke about, the ray of light, yeah. He has a ray of light. I'm thinking out loud here about the 10 hidden spheres, because I'm going back to that.
It's a major question, you know?
So this is Mokum L'Metzias, that's the Tzimtzum. And Afshoyas L'Metzias is even more. Wow. Okay, I think we should stop here. We'll go over this again. So we did the first half of chapter 165. You got it, my friend?
Cold.
Page 332 and 333.